America's century-long romance with the automobile, the passion has never burned brighter than with hot rods. Be they immaculate show cars, gritty racers, or somewhere in between, hot rods embody the core values that made this country great. Innovation, competition, improvisation, good looks, fast cars, and the relentless drive to succeed, as told by the legends, old and new, who lived it. This is the incredible true story of an American icon, the hot rod. Hello, I'm Chip Foose. The 1960s were some of the most turbulent years in American history, but they were also a witness to extraordinary innovation in the hot rod world. With the culture firmly entrenched in the American consciousness, hot rodders felt free to experiment with new concepts and push cars in bold new directions. What they didn't know is that they were at play in the twilight years of hot rodding's first golden age. The decade was kicked off in style by Mickey Thompson, whose record-breaking run at Bonneville in 1960 showed the world that hot rodding was a force to be reckoned with. A year later, TV Tommy Ivo premiered a dragster that took a page right out of Mickey's book. A 4-engine monster designed to get the most out of gas during the NHRA's fuel ban. It was also a great promotional vehicle for someone trying to make a living as a professional drag racer.
I thought if they liked 2 motors, they'd love 4. So there the showbiz came out and they again.
He did a lot for the industry. TV Tommy Iva, they call him. He was quite a spectacle with that 4-engine dragster that he built. In fact, I was doing some modification on the oil tanks. It was so darn big it just about took up the whole garage. The front tires made so much tire smoke you couldn't see where to go to drive the thing. So that kind of eliminated the front-wheel drive cars and drag racing.
You take a front-wheel drive car and jump on it in water sometimes. It just drifts all over the place with the thing. And then it put up these big plumes of smoke off the tires, which were way up to the front end of the car, so it would roll in on you. And for about the first 20 feet, you couldn't see where you were going. But I had a string of headers running down the middle of it, and that would blow the smoke away, and of course at speed, the wind would carry it away. But when you looked at it from the side, from the grandstands, the smoke would roll over the car almost all the way down the track. So people would come up and say, "How do you see? How do you see?" And of course, a story got better. I'd say at first, "Oh, you can't see for 100 feet. By the time I got done polishing the story, I told them you couldn't see till the half track. And their eyes would get big as saucers, and they'd say, "Really?"
And Tommy just epitomizes the open-mindedness of all of this. I mean, he's a showman, so he's going to race whatever it is. I mean, the 4-engine dragster that he had, I mean, I asked him about driving it, and he said, you couldn't see anything because the headers were in your face. All 4 tires were smoking. You just got in it and stabbed it and, you know, did a quarter of a mile in 8 seconds at 195 miles an hour, and you can't see a thing. I mean, what does that take to do that? I wouldn't even get in it today, and he'd probably still get in it.
There was so much innovation on the thing. The 2 right-hand motors were hooked with a chain coupler, which in essence made it a V16. It would drive into a differential that was set to one side of the car, and your legs would sit over the one side with a short and long axle. Then we just turned it around, and the 2 motors running the front wheels were in the car backwards. We had one set of motors running one way, one the other, so it made the car controllable. Otherwise, when you lifted at the other end, it could have virtually driven you off the track. The only thing that's strange about that deal is when you were sitting in the car and gunning it on the line, instead of rocking from side to side like a regular car would with one motor in it, the 4 motors were grabbing at the ground, and it would go up and down when you'd hit it on the starting line. It wouldn't jump. You could just feel it moving up and down. And then, of course, stopping the thing was like stopping a Sherman tank. You know, if that chute didn't come out, you just didn't get stopped.
Back on the Bonneville Salt Flats, a new type of car was taking a swing at Mickey's record. Hot rodder Craig Breedlove, seeking more horsepower than internal combustion could offer, ran a variety of streamliners powered by jet engines at the Salt Flats, pushing the land speed record ever higher.
Craig Breedlove, great hot rodder. Southern Californian, both Mickey, Craig as well. First American over 600 miles an hour. In fact, Craig Breedlove's record of over 400 was the official record. Mickey's was not because he couldn't make a backup run. But they're all American hot rodders, and you had them going out to the Salt Flats because they needed the space to run at those speeds in safety.
Following in the footsteps of Ack Miller and Stu Hilborn, rodders of the 1960s began to spread their influence beyond the traditional playgrounds of Bonneville and the drag strip. Extraordinary fabricator Phil Remington had already moved from hot rods to Formula One cars, working on Lance Reventlo's innovative Scarab program in the early 1960s, and then he became a key part of perhaps the most celebrated race team in American history. For a hot rodder, the idea of putting a large engine into a lightweight body wouldn't seem all that revolutionary. That's what they'd been doing since the early days of dry lakes racing, which made them the perfect men to execute Carroll Shelby's plan to mate the lightweight AC Roadster with Ford's new small block V8 to create a car that would dominate the international road racing circuits. Shelby chose the California hot rod shop of Dean Moon, best known for his Moon Eyes logo and wild dragsters and fabricators like Phil Remington, to build the prototype Cobra. The rest is history.
Carroll Shelby is truly one of my all-time heroes. He did it all. When it really comes time to getting the job done, he did it. He beat the Ferraris. He built the coolest car on the road, the Cobra, still today. He was a hot rodder, driver, constructor, businessman. There'll never be another person like Carroll Shelby. He is one of my all-time favorite guys.
Originally it was a 6-cylinder single overhead cam and another pushrod model, and it probably didn't have even 100 horsepower. Yeah, the car wasn't meant to have that kind of horsepower put through it, so when we put the small block Fords in there, we started having quite a few problems with different areas of the driveline. And we also did a lot of work on the front end because the original geometry was pretty bad, and we couldn't get the right gear ratios and the transmission, so we went to Chevrolet and put a lot of their first and second gear ratios in our Ford boxes. So it's quite an evolution. There's a lot of little things, that you don't think about. The fuel system and the radiators and pumps and cooling and brake ducts, and we kept going bigger and bigger on wheels to get more bite. And that meant bigger and bigger rotors and brakes. So we finally got to things where we could stop the car fairly well. Also, Ford spent a lot more money in the racing end than General Motors did. So more or less when we had those years of dominance, we just had more cars to enter and more or less smothered them with numbers.
And it looked like a sports car, but underneath it was a hot rod, and it had the heart and soul of a hot rod, and I think probably that is as much responsible for its popularity as its performance on the racetrack.
Also part of the early Cobra program was Dean Jeffries, who helped Shelby with a bit of misdirection.
He's got one car, and he says, we got to build a whole bunch of cars. And he says, I got to get some publicity and all this stuff. I says, how are you going to do that? There's only one car. You can't build those cars fast. But I want to show them that I got a lot of cars. And I says, why do you think you're going to do that? He says, can you paint them every day and make it a different color? Because we'll just say we got good. I says, fine, we'll be painting them. I can do them in one night for you. You can show them the next day and show them So we did. I did about 5 cars, 5 different colors, and it was only one car. That's the beginning of the Shelby thing.
Remington was also an integral part of the Ford GT40 team that defeated the seemingly unstoppable Ferrari factory team at the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
For the first time we won Le Mans, we were all dragging our behinds and being up 24 hours and probably 18 or 20 hours before that preparing the cars. And when the cars crossed the finish line like that, we just couldn't believe it. We were so elated we didn't know what to do. It was quite an experience and a real thrill to be able to beat Ferrari and the other competitors.
Like any business, the speed equipment industry had to evolve to stay relevant to their customers. Companies that managed to weather the transition from flatheads to early overhead valve engines were in a good position but couldn't rest on their laurels. One high-tech tool they used to stay competitive was a device that was just coming into its own, the dynamometer.
Dynos were hard to find. The one that my dad had in Highland has got a transmission in it. So you could run the engine at 5,000 and the dyno was only 2,500 to keep the RPMs down on the dyno. Clayton made them for the war and stuff, and then after that, it kind of was in limbo. You just went around and found what you'd find that would work, and then go for it. That was a unique thing. A dyno is something that can be really neat, or you could maybe hate it, because if you can't get something to work right or run right, it's not your friend. It's your friend if you get it all right and it shows you a good answer. It's an A-B comparator. Don't let the dyno drive the car. You still got to worry about torque and get off the corner and stuff like that.
Up to this time, we've been flying by the seat of our pants, you might say. In other words, we just kind of calculate what the next move would be in camshafts, and we'd prove it on Vic's dyno, maybe. Edelbrock had this little dyno he'd done all his testing on, and he bought a bigger one. He sold us that little dyno for $1,500, and we were anxious to get started testing, and we were trying various cams and Edelbrock's manifolds and so forth. That's when we made quite a few discoveries that way.
Edelbrock was thriving, but in 1962, Vic Sr. succumbed to cancer at the age of 49, leaving his 26-year-old son and namesake to pilot the company through an uncertain time.
When Vic died, that company could have done a lot of things. It could have gone downhill immediately. And I have to tell you that a lot of people in the industry thought that would happen. Vic had him, sweeping the floor and stuff, but whether he was learning the business, I didn't know which direction Vic Jr. was going in, to tell you the truth.
1962, he got cancer, lymphosarcoma, and he passed away. I was 26. My dad had 10 employees. We did about $500,000 worth of business a year. My dad had a lot of money in the bank and everything paid for. Very conservative guy. Everybody expected me to take the money and go to Vegas, and that was going to be it, but I didn't do that, fortunately.
Vic Sr. was very frugal, and that company was growing fast. There was a lot of money there, and Vic Jr. could have done a lot of bad stuff with it, but he didn't. If anybody could see Vic Edelbrock Company today, they know what an incredible job he did.
Meanwhile, the speed equipment industry as a whole was continuing to grow, to the point where the problem wasn't necessarily how to sell more manifolds or cams, but how to regulate an increasingly sprawling business.
Newspapers love to jump on anything that was street racing. So organizations like SEMA and like the National Hot Rod Association brought a legitimacy to this activity, to this sport, that was really important. And as the publisher of Hot Rod Magazine, Bob Peterson was in the center of it. He understood that, and he helped both organizations get off the ground. It was good for business, it was good for hot rodding, and we're fortunate that that's the way it happened.
The first SEMA show was actually called the Hot Rod Industry Trade Show, and it was held at Dodger Stadium in 1967. We had 92 exhibitors, 99 booths, and the profit was a little under $1,000. Now, the whole idea behind the SEMA show was, at the time, the United States Congress was giving all of the speed equipment manufacturers a really tough time. The mufflers are too loud and the engines they have too much horsepower. They wanted to regulate the industry. And here these speed equipment manufacturers are over here saying, hey, we know that our customers want to buy this equipment and make their cars run better, be more efficient, and go faster. Of course, go faster was very important. So they wanted to sell their manifolds and all of that. So the way to do it was to start an industry lobbyist group.
It was small potatoes in those days. And I remember Phil Wan used to say, we ought to have a show. A show? Really? Would anybody come to that? I couldn't believe that anybody would come to a speed equipment show. So they started that Speed Equipment Manufacturers Association.
The SEMA show just kind of put things together. It brought money into the association, which it needed badly.
They realized that if we take that speed name off there and make it specialty, it just opened it up real big to where big money comes in and they put on big SEMA show and so forth.
It turned out to be quite successful and everybody was very excited about it. I remember being at the Ambassador Hotel with Mr. and Mrs. Peterson and Ray Brock, Dick Day, Alex Exidius, all of the guys, and said, boy, this is really a good thing. We better plan on doing something bigger. So we went to the LA Convention Center. Then, after about 3 or 4 years, we went to Anaheim Convention Center. It's extremely successful, and then they moved to Vegas, and the rest is history. It's one of the largest trade shows in the world.
If Robert E. Peterson had done nothing after founding Hot Rod Magazine, he'd still be rightly acclaimed as a giant of the culture. But he continued to work tirelessly as an advocate for hot rods, even taking innovative steps to keep the cars in the public eye.
So, okay, we have to go back a few years to about 1966 when Mr. Peterson had a car show called the Motorama. He had them before, and he started them actually in the 50s. He had always felt having a continuing car show would be really fun for the visitors of Los Angeles. Where does everybody go when they come to Los Angeles? They go to Grauman's Chinese, and there was a building for sale next to the Grauman's Chinese. So he bought the building and said, I'm going to put a permanent car show in here, and we'll call it Motorama. So we had the opening, and it was a grand opening with lots of Hollywood movie stars, red carpet on the sidewalks. And one of the highlights of that particular evening was to run a dragster at night down Hollywood Boulevard. So Mr. Peterson talked to the Hollywood PD sergeant and said, I'd like to close it down. I just want to run a dragster down Hollywood Boulevard, and that's all we're going to do. It won't be real noisy or anything. We'll do it early. Tony Nancy went down there. It's a little less than a quarter of a mile, and he really revved that dragster up between Highland and La Brea. And, of course, in the process, the dragster going down Hollywood Boulevard at 200 plus miles an hour blew out a few windows at the famous Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, for which Mr. Peterson was responsible. But it was a great evening. James Garner was there. Ron Howard was there. George Barris had a lot of his custom cars there in the Motorama.
But sadly, by the time Tony Nancy made that trip down Hollywood Boulevard, hot rods had been in decline for some time. There was no one moment that you could point to and say, this is where it started. Instead, it was a number of factors that conspired to diminish public interest in hot rods.
Usually hot rodding isn't revolutionary, it's evolutionary. And with a few exceptions, these things just came about over time and changed as the times went on.
The very popularity of the cars was one element that worked against them, as the normally conservative Big Three car manufacturers had begun to learn some valuable lessons.
Wally had the NHRA Nationals in Detroit in 59 and 60, right there in their backyard. And the manufacturers could see what a huge market this was. And all of a sudden, you started having high-performance cars, and they sold.
Detroit is not stupid. You have a lot of very brilliant marketing people, a lot of very brilliant
product planners that were seeing what was going on, especially in Southern California. And they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we giving these kids cars that they would want to buy instead of doing themselves? We could give them something brand new, something that was engineered from the factory, something with a guarantee, something that was reliable, that they could just drive right out of the showroom.
Pretty soon you could go to a dealer, if you knew the right combination, go to a dealer and literally buy a race car that would outperform virtually any home-built hot rod. So it became much easier to go to your Pontiac dealer and finance and buy a GTO, and you get just as much attention and just as much stares and attract just as many girls. A lot easier than building a hot rod.
Hot rodding went into decline for probably a decade. I mean, people still did it and they were interested, and people were dechroming cars a little bit, but by the early 1960s and people were buying muscle cars, there was a tremendous decline.
Muscle cars weren't the only problem facing the culture. Custom hot rods had become, well, a little bit weird.
Hot rodding took a little bit of a strange turn in the 60s and even into the early 70s. It seems like the more odd your car was, the weirder it looked, the more improbable a vehicle it appeared to be, the better it was. And the least practical to drive seemed to win. It got a little kooky.
The whole notion was to take a lower class car, if you will, and give it the aura of a more expensive car. Make it sleeker, make it better. But somehow they got off the track. The cars became almost a caricature of themselves.
The Arab oil embargoes of the 70s, coupled with increased insurance regulations, were nearly the final nail in Rodding's coffin.
Gas went from 35 to 70 cents, and everybody thought the world was coming to an end. Plus, there was a line. You couldn't get gas when you wanted to. And then in 78, it did it again, and it went from 70 cents to $1.25, $1.30. Again, the lines. The economy tanked. Things just were not looking good. The expectations were very low. People just wanted to shrink inside their own little cocoons on wheels. They just wanted to shut out the outside world. Gas was so expensive. It was really hard to get around, and cars became almost a necessary evil. In a way, they weren't something to celebrate anymore. They were something that you kind of had to live with because you had to live with them.
Nothing lasts forever, and the golden age of hot rodding had come to a close. But just as decline was inevitable, so too was rebirth. The culture would spend over a decade treading water, but when hot rods returned, they did so with a bang. I'm Chip Foose. Thanks for watching. Next time on American Icon, the Hot Rod.
All right.
You'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who has had a bigger contribution to the hot rod preservation than Bruce Meyer.
Well, I was overwhelmed when Bruce asked me to restore the Doane Spencer car. I don't think I was ever more nervous in my life.
I started thinking, they've got to have hot rods at Pebble Beach. Well, I'm telling you, it was 10 years.